November 2024. The US government has spent over $6 trillion, more than the GDP of every country except China. Since 1984, while GDP grew by 5.6 times, the federal debt grew 20 times over and now sits at $35 trillion, a burden that threatens the very future of the United States. This is DOGE, fantasy or much needed reality. The first question we need to ask is whether DOGE is needed at all. Let's start off with the Department of Defense. With a budget of $840 billion, it's notorious for waste. For example, in the 1980s, the Pentagon paid $7,600 for a coffee maker and $640 for a single toilet seat. But this isn't limited to the 80s. Recently, a contractor charged $8,100 for a drive pin that cost $46, a markup of 17,000%. Nothing gets past the Pentagon. It's no surprise then that the Pentagon has failed every independent audit since 2018. In the latest audit, 15 agencies handling 68% of the budget could not properly account for their finances. Yet, the Pentagon's CFO still called this a success. Imagine if a Fortune 500 company failed 6 audits in a row. The government would likely investigate and everyone involved would be fired. But this isn't limited to the Department of Defense. In 2022, improper payments across federal programs totaled nearly $250 billion. This includes payments to people who died years ago, bogus medical reimbursements, duplicate unemployment claims, and more. But it continues. Over the last 3 years, the US spent $5 billion on EV stations, and the result? Only 7 have been installed. The Department of Veteran Affairs wasted $2 billion on a failed IT modernization project. The Department of Agriculture subsidized a $50 million ski resort under the guise of a rural development project. All of this could cover the damages from Hurricane Helene 6 times over. So yeah, it's bad. But the bloat isn't limited to financial mismanagement. The regulatory burden has ballooned as random government agencies continue to pass dozens of new rules unchecked every single year. In 1976, there were 71,000 pages of rules. Today, there are over 185,000 pages, more than double. So while the US population increased by 56%, pages of rules increased 160%. Sounds reasonable. The conclusion is simple. Something like DOGE is absolutely needed.
Elon Musk and I are in a position to start the mass deportations of millions of unelected federal bureaucrats out of the DC bureaucracy. That too is how we're going to save this country.
Led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, DOGE promises to cut $2 trillion in federal spending by identifying waste and inefficiency. And while this sounds nice, the reality is DOGE has no real authority. It's an advisory body within the White House Office of Management and Budget. All it can really do is make recommendations. Nothing more. Musk and his team can't fire employees, can't cut programs, or reduce budgets directly. To make matters worse, DOGE isn't the first attempt to reform government spending. For one, the US already has the Government Accountability Office, which identified the $250 billion of fraud we mentioned earlier, but no one listens to them. The closest parallel to DOGE happened in 1982. President Ronald Reagan launched the Grace Commission, led by businessman J. Peter Grace. The commission uncovered that 1/3 of tax dollars were wasted on inefficiencies and duplication. It recommended privatizing certain services, consolidating agencies, and cutting subsidies. But despite identifying billions in savings, its recommendations were mostly ignored. Across the Atlantic, Margaret Thatcher led a similar effort. Her administration, spearheaded by businessman Sir Derek Rayner, cut 16,000 public sector jobs and privatized industries like utilities and railways, saving billions. But this is a far cry from the $2 trillion Musk has earmarked and was small even for the UK. The most successful example that the modern world has seen is David Lang's reforms in New Zealand. It was so successful that even today, New Zealand spends less as a percentage of GDP than they did prior to the reforms. But inevitably, the cuts were extremely unpopular, and it led to David Lang losing power and no longer having control. As we always say, you can give, but you can never take. So even if Musk and Vivek identify opportunities for improvement, are the Republicans and Donald Trump willing to stomach the potential backlash from voters? The decisions ahead won't just be tough, they'll be wildly unpopular. Let's start off with mandatory spending. This spending doesn't require a vote from Congress and is automatically obligated based on existing laws. The largest bucket of mandatory spending is Social Security at nearly $1.5 trillion. Social Security provides benefits to 73 million Americans and is pretty much untouchable. Not only is it legally mandatory, but Trump himself has affirmed that he won't even change this. That's not to say there isn't an opportunity to improve. Currently, 49 million Americans receive retirement benefits through Social Security, but by changing the full retirement age from 67 to 70, the government could save up to 13% of Social Security outlays. Some might say this is unfair, but right now, Social Security is on a path to insolvency, and young people like you will be on the hook. But alas, this would be politically impossible. Just look at what happened in France. When they tried to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64, mass protests erupted. And although Americans aren't as pro-protest as the French, we are certain that increasing the retirement age by 3 years would be met with severe backlash, especially from older voters. The next is Medicare and Medicaid, which when combined represent $1.8 trillion. Medicare provides health insurance for 65 million Americans, primarily those over the age of 65, and Medicaid provides health insurance for nearly 80 million vulnerable and low-income Americans. Combined, that's almost 50% of the total population. Similar to Social Security, this is a very popular program and likely impossible to cut meaningfully. However, there are probably opportunities to generate cost savings through efficiency measures, in particular ensuring payments are delivered to the right people, not making payments to deceased people, and more. But beyond that, we are of the belief that Republicans and Democrats will fight tooth and nail for any meaningful changes to Medicare and Medicaid. In addition to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, there is another $1.2 trillion earmarked for mandatory programs, which means that 61% of the $6.9 trillion in spending is mandatory. But wait, there's more. Although interest on US debt is not categorized as mandatory, it pretty much is. Currently, interest on debt represents $892 billion. These are non-negotiable payments. Although they are not mandated by law, non-payment would mean default and strain on US credit quality and trade. That means that after subtracting Social Security, healthcare, and debt, there is only $1.72 trillion for DOGE to go after, below Elon's $2 trillion target. When analyzing the $1.7 trillion of discretionary spend, the biggest bucket by far is defense at $840 billion. Half of this goes to private contractors, many of whom, as we have shown, overcharge for weapons and services. So there is definitely room for efficiency. One of the biggest changes that can be made is moving away from a cost-plus model, following the lead of Silicon Valley to lower costs. To explain, the cost-plus model rewards inefficiency and discourages cost savings, actually benefiting contractors when inflation increases prices. It's a system begging for reform. For example, if it cost a contractor $10 million to purchase materials and the allowable profit margin is 10%, they make $1 million. If material costs increase to $20 million, now they make $2 million. As you can see, this is a terrible model because the contractor actually benefits from creeping costs. But outside of this, defense is a very, very tricky subject. For one, most wars have bipartisan support. In 2024, the US passed a bill to provide $95 billion in military aid and support to Ukraine and Israel. 73% of the House supported aid for Ukraine and 86% supported aid for Israel. Similarly, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023 had clear bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. This means that defense spending sees little to no pushback. It's almost always a guarantee. Honestly, even we were surprised by just how much support these bills consistently get. Even though many, if not most, Americans are opposed to a lot of this spending, the spending continues to be propped up by politicians. The US spends an exorbitant amount on defense, representing 37% of global spending. This begs the question though, would the Republicans and Trump be willing to cut costs here? Maybe, but it would definitely experience significant pushback. Once you remove defense spending, you are left with less than $1 trillion of spending. Now, that's still a lot of money, but it's a far cry from $2 trillion. That said, there is a lot of waste here. A few examples include the VA's terribly managed electronic health record modernization program, which could cost $29 billion over budget, or the Transportation Office potentially spending $13 billion over the originally estimated $2.6 billion on the Big Dig project in Boston. However, even when you add all of these up, they are a drop in the bucket. Libertarians would argue that many of these departments could be cut altogether. I mean, look at what Milton Friedman said.
So I want to just go right down the list quickly and have you give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Keep them or abolish them. Department of Agriculture.
Abolish.
Gone.
Oh, man.
Department of Commerce.
Abolish.
Gone. Department of Defense.
Keep.
Keep it. Department of Education.
Abolish.
Gone. Energy.
Abolish.
This includes the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, HUD, parks, and more. But let's be real, that's just not going to happen. Imagine the pushback when the government announces that the Department of Education is being cut. Disregard whether it will be good or bad for the country. Just think about the optics. Will Republican politicians be willing to lose votes and re-election for such a cause? Probably not. So where does this all leave us? DOGE's $2 trillion goal is ambitious and will require overcoming immense political resistance, entrenched bureaucracy, and legal hurdles. The truth is, both parties are responsible for decades of unchecked spending. If real change is to happen, it will require accountability, not just from the government leaders, but from all of us citizens. This money comes from you, and no matter how you cut it, you will have no future if the country continues to borrow today to cripple tomorrow. I am hopeful that something good can come of this program. Even though we don't think the $2 trillion target will be hit, saving even a fraction of it will be a big win. But this won't fix the agency issue of the US government. Politicians will continue to make promises to win elections and secure their own personal future and beg. In our view, for real change to happen, we need only listen to the Oracle of Omaha.
The deficit in 5 minutes.
How?
You just pass a law that says that anytime there's a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for re-election. Yeah. Now you've got the incentives in the right place, right? So it's capable of being done.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to 2 and 20 for more business and news analysis.